we will begin. And the first question we're going to ask, introduction to the study, is civility. It is more civil now, less civil now. When was it the most civil in our society? And this is meant to be interactive. So meant to be, if I ask a question, they're not rhetorical. So any thoughts on civility? Yeah, quick.
Here, grab one of those.
Thinking what you're saying, anybody's been to the Lincoln Museum in Springfield and seen the cartoon dealing with Abraham Lincoln. They're not very civil.
Yeah. No, that's true. So talking about Abraham Lincoln and the cartoons, so thinking him sometimes as an ape or, yeah, absolutely.
It's the media. There's more media now. So we see all of that. If that had been there when Lincoln was drawing cartoons, it would have been.
There might have been a civil war, yeah.
Yeah.
Heaven help us all, yeah.
And it's place, it's in our face.
Yeah.
Actually, what Bertha is saying is exactly right, the media. But it's always, we're always faced with it.
Yeah, yeah. We need to turn the air lower?
No.
Okay.
I'm just saying we're bombarded.
We were bombarded with it. Well, because part of the history, we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's one of the videos that I don't think is loading this morning. Is it's done by The Atlantic, and it's 60 years of political ads. And whatever I can't do now, I will load up online, and so folks will be able to see it. But it's 60 years of political ads, starting with Eisenhower and running through, I think, 2012, because you had Obama Romney in there as well. And this is not something that is a left problem or a right problem. It is a problem. Cliff mentioned going back to Lincoln's time. We were just in Virginia and at Monticello. They have stuff about how John Adams attacked Jefferson and vice versa. And these are founding fathers. And these are men who became really about the closest of friends in their later years in their correspondence. And does anybody know when they died? July 4th, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And so really a interesting thing, but there were all kinds of terrible things. And part of it is media saturation. And I don't know enough about St. Louis history, but most towns had a left-leaning newspaper and had a right-leaning newspaper. And so sometimes we talk about that this is something that's new, that you're in a information, you're in an echo chamber, and you hear what you want to hear. You have your biases or opinions reinforced. That was always been there, but I think just the prevalence of it and the question of what to believe in, but the question with whether the veracity of something with our kids, how many times one child gets in trouble, we see them do something, and what do they say? The other one started it, and so it doesn't matter what, as followers of Christ, what someone else does. Integrity is what we do when no one else is watching. And so we're going to be talking about that throughout this study. Part of it is actually going to focus on the readings or the handouts that we have. And I posted online, but I don't expect everybody to have read it. So we're going to be times we're going to read it here in class as well. So there's stuff you can read at home. It's mainly, I think it's so well written that it's a really good read no matter what. So the starting thing we're going to talk about is why be civil? And one of the things we're going to do out of this class is jump into the fall, get a baseline about how we talk to each other, but also more important, how we listen to each other. So we'll do the popcorn exercise of, somebody want to mention a divisive issue in our culture right now?
Immigration.
Immigration.
Healthcare.
All right, let me put on the board station.
Race.
sexual abuse.
Sexual identity as well.
Women's health, i.e. abortion.
That's a good, we could talk for ever on this. I made a couple of changes. I went with although the current president with Trump is certainly a divisive, there are people who feel very strongly one way or the other on that. I just wrote executive branch, because I recognize even when I preach, there are words that we use that if someone hears it, they will some folks will hear a word that might even sound fairly benign in my speaking it, but they hear it, it's a charged word. Automatically, someone goes, yes or no, and this words matter. This is one thing that was reinforced in education all the way up and down. So the whole point of this course, this class discussion is we're not going to come to a resolution on these things, but we're going to talk about how we engage with each other and how are we citizens of the world and be in dialogue and have convictions, but still have the ability to talk with each other. And most importantly, part of that is listen to each other. Because how many times have we had a conversation, and I'm as guilty as anyone, where somebody is talking, presenting their view, their opinion on something, and in our head, we're not listening, we're formulating our response. And what that does is it negates the other person's opinion completely. How many of you have ever been changed by a conversation? You know, I will give one example for myself, and my daughters, Sam to some extent, yeah, Sam too, you'll ask him to do something. And I would love to say, they always say, yes, Dad, yes, Mom, yes, love to, Papa. But no, it's why, or they'll debate with it, is it their turn and this or that. And I was like that a lot growing up. I remember my first summer in college, between my freshman and sophomore year, and I was talking, it was like the women's studies area or something, they made some comments about the soccer players at Mizzou, and the female soccer players, and in the headline or in the caption, it referred to them as girls. And I was talking, the person said, well, this isn't right. I'm like, you're kind of overreacting, aren't you? And then they asked a question about referring to someone as boys, and I said, well, that's not right, they're men. And I was like, oh, thank you. You know, and because one thing civility means is that we have to be willing to engage and to engage honestly. So we're going to, there's a video that's not loading. Does it? Okay, let's see if it'll, oh.
Oh, there we go.
See if the audio works. Well, and this is part of the issue, the challenge of the hobby of this. Maybe it's better to watch without. about a dozen times, and I'm gonna skip this. I apologize. Okay, except there's a couple of things. Do you guys recognize any of these?
Oh, yeah.
This one's iconic. You know what's interesting about this one right here is it never mentions anyone's name. It just shows a little child counting, picking flowers or picking daisy, and then yeah. The whole point of this is that the whole point of this is to show that it's going on both sides, but also showing how sometimes it gets a little crueler. I will hopefully have that fixed by next week with the audio. So how about this is a unison prayer, so let's take a moment just to be still, and then we will go forward. Merciful God, open our hearts as we gather today. May our lips speak of your love for all people. May our actions demonstrate our faith in you. Amen. We're going to be talking here about the 4 virtues of civility, and there's patience, there's integrity, there's humility, there's mutual respect. And so what we're going to do, and I know the chairs, I wasn't sure how many folks we were going to have, as best as we can. So can these 2 rows right here talk about patience? And can we get the folks right back here talk about integrity, and then we'll have you all talk about humility and have you talk about mutual respect. And so as best as you can to turn chairs, whatever, that's fine. And we're going to take about 5 minutes on this. In your readings, there is a section, it's not a long reading, so the second page, back on the first page, there is patience. I just want you all to read that and then talk about it. What we're trying to do is, can we describe this in one sentence? So can we describe what the value of patience is, or integrity, humility, mutual respect in one sentence? And so I'm going to have a sheet up here that we have to write that down in one sentence. So someone with better penmanship from each group, if you're willing to come up and write that down. But clear as mud? Julie, you have better handwriting than I do.
Oh, I don't know about that.
I took the sheet down earlier, and I was like, this folks is a little.
Okay. Yes. Engelbert, you want to come into the conversation? Of course, now your back is going to be on the camera, Alice. Pull around. Engelbert, come join in. Come on. Come on. Okay, you can sit over there. All right, so it's at the bottom. You want to read this out loud first, what mutual respect is, so we can summarize it in a sentence.
This engagement with others in conversation shows a mutual respect. Fourth virtue of civility. Mutual respect demands that even in the midst of intense we honor our opponents as citizens with the right to engage in politics and to convert. It reminds us that in the midst of our most meaningful and intractable disagreement, we can thoroughly disagree with another's view while still valuing them as fellow citizens who presumably care as deeply about our national well-being as we do.
Well, we've all got it written. Yeah, so in looking at that, how can you summarize it? What's mutual respect?
I just keep thinking of our president being a major problem.
So, forget it. So, it does say that, you know, we avoid demonizing one another. We shouldn't suggest that God hates our opponent, that when you do that, it makes it difficult to show respect. So what are we supposed to be respecting them as being, even though we disagree with them? Respect them as being what? We're all
As equal, they're not lesser because their opinion is different from ours.
so we're all, just as human beings.
I listen to the white supremacists, the Jew haters, those violent groups, and I immediately shut my brain on they're idiots. And that's what comes to my brain right away.
But I think that
How
we're
can they be
talking
so
about
hateful?
politics here.
And how are you supposed to respect them?
And you really have to look hard for something that you can agree with them on. And I think maybe that's not to close your mind.
How do you know anymore?
Try to keep an open mind.
Really
with the public, I see people that I think,
So
oh,
does that enter
you know,
into?
and yet I can talk to them and listen to what they want while they're at my workplace. Try to interact with them, even though I'm thinking, this isn't somebody I could ever be.
You're assuming the person's sane to start with. A lot
Right.
of these people are on the borderline of schizophrenic or
Well, that's true.
You look at the
And
Charlottesville
having had
event,
people that I've dealt with, who still think,
from the Charlottesville event, if we're to go along with this, then we would have to believe what the president said, that there are some good people in these hate groups as well. I don't know that I've
Probably
found it.
need to complete that sentence.
Well, there's people that are filled
Do we
with
need to
hate.
elaborate
So
on
that's hard to kind of think about.
Or just say
God
good enough?
loves them just as he loves us. So if God loves them, you know, how can we at least respect that there's some qualities about them? Right. The fact that God loves them, that means that we should show some kind of respect, but it's
There we go back to that first sentence, right?
if we believe that God hated some people, then it would be easier to dismiss those people.
interaction, interaction.
What?
Maybe God doesn't have an opinion on everything.
that's opens up another issue.
So how do we write this one sentence?
I think the last sentence.
Which one?
The last one? Oh, no. The right to participate in the American enterprise. It's public moral conversation.
It's hard to imagine yesterday morning this whole place was full of stuff.
So let's put it in our own words. So mutual respect is, honoring is a pretty strong word. Do we want to say recognize?
Recognize, that's fine. That's right.
So we recognize
You know, an organization like Habitat.
that everyone has the right.
Requires that we remain.
Free speech. It's basically the First Amendment.
Is what?
Conquering ourselves.
I mean, rather than going the way.
Our opinions get out of the conversation. You know, out of.
Let's take about 2 more minutes.
With that,
I tend to that judge was about really a bad guy.
I mean, I think on Friday.
But control that is.
We had a whole,
Can't control the other person's actions, you can only control our reactions.
we had a whole session last Tuesday with all the police chiefs about intrinsic bias within, extrinsic bias of how you react to it. And so everybody has a little bit of both, and that's the problem.
Well, I'll say that for me, it's mostly, it's not civility as much as it is diplomacy anymore. I mean, I can see the value in discourse, but I can't identify with respect. And so it's both humor and people that you have to just trying to figure out a way. You don't get into it every time you're there, even if you're disgusted and have no respect, you know, for what it is that they believe they do. But you know, it's a matter of just being cautious. It's cautious. I mean, you don't kick, you know, a yellow jacket. I mean, you just don't do it unless you want to suffer consequences. So at this point, I think, you know, in what's going on, it's not really something defined by unity. It's how are things going to separate. I mean, you know, I won't be surprised if there's, you know, violence, maybe not on the level of the Civil War, but there's certainly going to be a secession. You know, this country is going to split. So it's just how you deal with it.
And this is out of respect, mutual recognition.
Well, diplomacy, I think, is the best way for me to think of it. You try to avoid the worst.
So we'll maybe finish up where we're at right here, and if we could get a volunteer from each group, just in a sentence, as best you can. It does not. This is not. This is not going to the Library of Congress. It's just going to be here, and so maybe the strongest debate on who has the worst handwriting. The answer is me. So.
We have recognize as a word that we refer to.
We honor your writing. We
Compounds.
Yeah,
Remember in the old days when we died?
even if I think you're tragically mistaken, it says, you know, even if you know, violently or vehemently disagree, I recognize you have
their opinion.
They're right. Right.
You do lines, you're on lines.
Even if we disagree, we know they have a right to free speech.
To try to make you understand structure. Parts of speech.
Put that in some kind of.
But I have family members, probably you all do, I disagree with them on very extreme. So we never talk about it. We talk about what movie they saw, you know, avoid it if you can.
He's my baby.
And still, then you can have a relationship with that person. You're not.
Well, or people will say, I won't talk about politics. What's their thinking, and they may have some good valid. And you're okay to find out if you discuss it in a respectful way. Did you have an idea where you're looking up?
We're gonna talk.
Is it a quote from Hamilton?
Well, you know, talking about bad times, Burr was the vice president of the United States. They were shot
Yeah, that's my fault. I did.
Does he draw? right? Is that all?
Carl, but that's all.
Good, Ron. Cheers.
If I'd known you were coming today, I would have brought your check. I still got it on my, should have said sure. Good morning, Vivi. Good morning, Nina Marie. So do you have a quote for us?
You all have been driving.
Yeah, I know, we just got in from Omaha last night.
You did, I'm not expecting them to be here this morning.
Well, I wasn't either. She was at camp for a whole week.
And they went to how was it?
Yeah.
Was it fun?
So what do you have for us? You gotta hurry.
It's good. We can. The thing about these values is we're going to revisit them every week, and there's a possibility of looking and saying, I think I want to emphasize this more. I think maybe it might be not a magic word, but there might be phrases we find that are saying that's more of where I think we are as a group. And these are going to be our core values over the next 3 sessions together. So as we look at that, and we'll have patience with for Mike.
We had a word change, they didn't give me an eraser. Okay,
I'm saying, it says patience, that's all I'm, so,
Perfect example, right?
so with the group that talked about patience, what stood out to you about that reading, things you agreed with, things you disagreed with? It's a couple paragraphs, so it's not super long, but did you find yourself nodding, or did you find it was incomplete, or where were you all at with your group discussion?
We talked a lot about how all of us lack patience.
Uh-huh.
And that we have, and as I said, it was something that I daily pray for.
Good. That how, do we all lack patience?
Yes.
Yes. Is patience a Christian virtue? It is the first characteristic of love. Is patient, when Paul says that in 1 Corinthians 13. So, any other thoughts from your group on patience? Bert, did you have one?
No, I have no thoughts.
Integrity. Oh, actually, let's read it. Be still, be present to affirm and show value for others' perspective. Good.
Oh, we have.
Yes, you graduate to work. Yeah, that's. How about our integrity group? I'll read it. Integrity is the commitment to represent our own position and those of our opponents truthfully, honestly, accurately, and consistently.
We focused on the positives of that paragraph, not the negatives.
Good. How many, any other thoughts from your group on that? So we really, I'm talking my wife into it, hopefully our daughters into it. I want Amelia to do speech and debate. And I think that'll be, any of you all went speech and debate growing up? And national, did you have Babalu?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's another reason I like you, John. And so that was a big, we weren't always the best at football, but we were pretty good at speech and debate at Parkview. And that made you so popular in town. But one of the things that you do in speech and debate is you're presented with an issue. And you have to, in two-man debate, which is policy debate, you have to be able to be on the affirmative side or the negative side. You have to be able to argue both those things. And I'm telling you, that is, you have to, there's integrity to that. You can't just say, I only want to be on the affirmative or I only want to be on the negative side. To be able to accurately describe something. And maybe it's something that in your core you disagree with, but at least you're being fair to what the issue is and those who hold that opinion strongly. I think space and debate is great, and again, my children like to argue. So, humility. I'll read it. Enter every public conversation with the expectation that we can be persuaded to think something different than we do now. Perfect example, Christ, 1 Philippians 2.
Pretty good example of humility.
Yeah. Though he were, it wasn't the very image.
Although, basically said that he was entitled to all the prerogatives of God, he chose to empty himself.
And he humbled himself, even to death on a cross. So, so anything else with humility?
In our culture, humility is not very positive.
Yeah.
It really is a characteristic.
Well, it's got no respect.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was actually, right, when you were talking, I was thinking the same thing of these words in and of themselves without any definition behind them in our culture, how many of these are seen as inherently positive? Maybe integrity of the bunch. Words are charged. Like, I think words like tolerance are good words. I remember talking with my youth director when I was in college, and I'd kind of changed probably a little bit from where I was in high school. In the city of Nixa, Missouri, they had 4 names, or 4 words that were part of their motto or charter or whatever, and one of the words was tolerance, and they were having this big debate over whether to remove the word tolerance from it. And I was talking with him, and he goes, and he was coming from his own place of, I think it's integrity on his side, but he was saying, but what about the things we should be intolerant of? And now for him, that meant a whole laundry list of things that might be different than my list of things that, intolerance of intolerance kind of thing. And so, but tolerance, I think, is a pretty strong virtue. But we're going to talk about that in a second. Mutual respect, question mark.
Well, the question mark is on the respect.
Uh-huh.
We recognize mutual recognition of rights, individuals' rights, but that's assuming the individual is sane.
Yes.
We have Nazi illusions and name-calling things coming from individuals that may not necessarily be sane.
Sure.
So it's more their right to speak it versus we're not trying to respect them for speaking it.
Sure. Sure. So it's what's the old phrase? I might not agree with what you say, but I will fight or die fighting for your right to say it. And the history is filled. I mean, the First Amendment's a wonderful thing for all the folks who might have. Speaking of hot button issues, gun control clearly is a big issue, and for all the folks who have the bumper sticker that says "I'm for the Second Amendment and I vote" or that kind of thing, I don't know if they make bumper stickers. They should, or maybe I should, that says "I'm for the First Amendment and I vote," because I think the First Amendment, where we talk about freedom of assembly, religion, freedom of speech, even speech we don't like, this is a very hard thing. I remember in my second class in the journalism school, they were talking about the marketplace of ideas. I think it was Francis Bacon, who talked about it, that in the marketplace of ideas, that truth will win out. And I still believe that, and yet I struggle with it too.
You have to start with the assumption that there is.
Yeah, okay, pilot. That is. It starts with the assumption of what is true. And gosh, that's another class altogether. But it is. I mean, but then you get into philosophy, then you get into theology, then you get into a simple matter of perspective. You get to the question of Descartes of what is reality and what is not reality. And but it is a fair question to say, what is the recognition of rights, but also recognizing perhaps a mania in someone or a certain level of being unhinged in that person. And then we can talk about moving forward how we engage, or maybe how we patiently or disengage from folks. Because when I first taught this class a couple years ago, I knew what trolls were on the internet. Most people in the class did not know what trolls were. Do you all know what trolls are on the internet? They're the folks who will post stuff looking that is so brash or so upsetting or so contrarian. They're looking for people to come back, and they're looking to get folks angry. And in the last couple of years, we've recognized there are certain trolls that are not just individuals. There are agencies, there are governments, there are folks who will try to upset folks. And a good example, though, of this is the usurping. Anybody know, is it Pepe? It was the frog. It's the frog meme. Maybe we'll talk about that next time. It's just this usurping of this frog, this really poorly drawn frog, as a major thing for the election 2 years ago. And we'll talk more about it. But it's out there, but how do we navigate that? The one thing I will say with that is it's a lot different having a conversation with someone one-on-one than it is to have a conversation through media. Because the one thing about any written, even letters, but especially text, emails, they are two-dimensional. You can't read tone. And so what we do is we put our tone onto it, what we presuppose that person is saying. And so there have been times where my wife says, "Read this." I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Don't you see the tone in that?" I'm like, I can't read tone. Unless it's laid on really thick. And then I can read a little bit. But
So, I think, did Inga Marie, did you have one more thing in our group that you didn't get to share with us about mutual respect?
No.
You didn't find something you wanted to share with us? No. No, she'll do it later.
that's all right. You can share it with me later.
Okay.
I'll put it in the PowerPoint next week. But what other virtues are there? Empathy is a great one.
To be able to try to put yourself in someone's shoes that they're having different.
Yeah. To put ourselves in someone else's shoes.
That transcends the custom,
Yeah.
particularly the patients and the others.
Yeah.
Probably mutual respect.
So
What about honesty?
Integrity. What's the difference?
What's the difference between honesty and integrity?
let's explore that, because they're different. I don't have Merriam-Webster on speed dial right now, but I think a lot of it goes hand in hand, because honesty is a portion of integrity. Integrity is a portion of honesty. There are folks who would say that they are acting with integrity, but they're not being honest. Because one of the problems, especially we see every 2 years, 4 years, election cycles, is folks will purposely misrepresent their opponent's position. On a smaller scale, on a micro scale, one of my kids make fun of me, but I have 6 preset dials on my phone in my car, on my radio in my car, but I only listen to one station, so it doesn't matter. So I listen to NPR, and NPR at noon is Don Marsh, and Don Marshall and I've talked about that. Every time I hear Don Marsh, I think Don Marshall. But this last week, I happened to be in the car at noon going somewhere, and on Thursday and Friday. So on Thursday, he was interviewing Mark Montalbani, and on Friday he was interviewing Steve Singer. And to his credit, this is the I forget what state journalism is, but this is good journalism, where they say, okay, you have said this about that. And then not necessarily someone's holding someone's feet to the fire, but holding them accountable, on both sides and both, get, your head gets dizzy because there's so much spin that goes on in politics. But someone can claim personal integrity and then disagree with the integrity of someone else. I'm gonna fast forward, maybe about 5 more minutes together. Fast forward to something that I think is really important. What civility does not require. It's written down in there. I'm gonna let you all read it, but in the interest of time, what does civility not require? Agreement. It does not mean agreement. The other thing right here, one of the big issues, and this is, I think, the pendulum swinging the pendulum of the culture swings left and right and in between. One way that tolerance has been misunderstood is, I think, a form of laziness. It means saying we're not going to engage with each other. What are the two things you don't talk about at the dinner table? Politics and religion. But what has happened is we take tolerance to mean that we just won't talk about things that are different. And that's messed up.
Yeah.
Because these are things that are defining of us. And so if we're going to talk about, if we're going to talk and truly get to know somebody, then we truly need to get to know that person. But I think what culture has defined a lot of places tolerance as, just don't talk about it. And talk about it honestly. So it doesn't require agreement. What else does civility not require?
A winner and a loser.
A winner and a loser. A winner and a loser. That too is a challenge in our culture right now. The idea is that I win, that I have to win. And this is gone, and he writes this, and there's truth. Gone are the days, and I would never think growing up that you would lift up the relationship between Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. And I was like, oh, those are, Boy, the way Glenn Miller played, and we started doing Archie and Edith Bunker singing at the piano, that those were the days. But gone are those days. How many of you are from Illinois? So Illinois, there was was it Everett Dirksen?
Everett Dirksen.
Yeah. And he had a famous saying. It says, there is one principle I hold up above all else, or something to that extent. Do you remember what it was? He said compromise. And this is the challenge, because you either win or you lose. And that the best stuff that comes out of Washington or Jeff City or City Hall is a bill no one's happy with. Because everybody gives up something. But that's the problem if we have folks who are strictly, and if we become, and churches are like this too, strictly ideologues. Strictly saying that I am in the right camp. And I am doing, or our group is the way people get it, or there's a litmus test for being right, or in the church the problem is, it is a litmus test for being loved. It's a litmus test for being accepted. Yeah.
Senator Danforth is a big one on the compromise. He's written a book that talks a lot about it.
The St. Louis Post-Dispatch did I guess since we're here, the Post-Dispatch did a cartoon about Danforth. This is probably about 10, 15 years ago. It had Jack Danforth in 1970. And it says, this ultra-right wing. And Jack Danforth in 1980, and then there was just this. And then it was, and in reality, what we're looking for, I don't know what the gender inclusive version of statesman is. Statesperson. statesmen and stateswomen. That was the ideal that we were taught about. And you don't have to agree with people, but you can respect them. And because this is what it ultimately comes down to is to trust in politics or religion that people, on the whole, there are some folks who are unhinged, but on the whole, that people want want these things. But part of that is honesty on our part, and part of it is honesty on their part as well. I'm going to just say one quick thing. Okay, no, I won't. As we get ready for next week, we're partly through this, so I encourage you to read finish 1, read 2 and 3 if you want to. We're going to finish up 1 and start 2 next week. I always like to leave with something positive. I don't have, the video is not working. But illustrations where there was civility are things we need to celebrate. When we see civility in civic discourse or politics, and someone who some politics I agree with, some politics I don't, is Senator John McCain. And there was an instance, if you remember, in 2008, and I'll post the video online, but in 2008, where he was at a rally, it happened twice, and someone was just really, really worked up and was describing his opponent, Barack Obama, as I can't trust him, he's a Muslim, he's this or he's that, and McCain said, no, you're wrong. I know him, he's a good man, we just disagree on these issues. And I mean, that's awesome. That's awesome. And that is an exhibit, and some folks got mad at him for it. And the whole point of this is that we bring our faith and our religion and at some level, our political understandings out into the public world. And we engage. Presbyterians one of the reasons we have public schools in our country is because Presbyterians. It's because of outgrowth of Sunday schools. Presbyterians have always been engaged. Last thing that Presbyterians are called are people of the middle way. And so it doesn't mean that we're too far this way, too far that way. We might feel strongly that way, but on the whole, we're in the wide middle on things. And so as you leave, I don't know if it's in there or not, but think about the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, make me a channel of your peace. And we will pick back up next week. And let me know if there are certain things that you'd like me to highlight or certain things that are blind spots for me, because that's one of the hardest things in the lasting times is to recognize our own blind spots. Thank you all.